Welcome to Education Lounge.
I'm so glad you're here because today we're diving into one of the absolute most fascinating topics in the history of psychology. We're going to explore the evolution of these huge foundational ideas, tracing the path right from the pioneering days of Sigmund Freud all the way to the groundbreaking work of the Neo-Freudian theorists. Before we get too deep into the theory, I've got to ask you a question. When you make a choice, when you react to a situation, or just develop a specific personality trait, who is really driving those decisions? This provocative question is exactly what sets up the whole concept of the unconscious mind. Okay, let's dive into this mental roadmap. This will help us navigate from the deep internal workings of the mind outward to the impact of society and culture. First, we'll cover the hidden unconscious mind. Second, id, ego, and superego. Third, Freud's psychosexual stages. And finally, number 4, the Neo-Freudian theorists. All right, section 1, the hidden unconscious mind. So let's talk about classical psychoanalysis. This is a theory by Sigmund Freud emphasizing unconscious desires, childhood experiences, and a conflict of drives as basically the formative stuff in personality development. What this really means in plain English is that Freud believed our foundational behaviors, the very things that make us who we are not rooted in our conscious, logical day-to-day choices. Actually, they're rooted in hidden desires and past childhood experiences that we might not even actively remember. For instance, think of a time you completely just accidentally forgot to go to a dreaded dentist appointment. Well, Freud would argue that wasn't a scheduling accident at all. No, that was your unconscious mind actively taking the wheel and protecting you from a situation it associated with pain and anxiety, entirely without your conscious permission. Pretty crazy, right? You can think of Freud's core ideas as the 3 load-bearing pillars of his entire psychological architecture: the unconscious mind, childhood experiences, and a conflict of drives. These concepts really set the stage for a view of human nature where the mind is essentially a battlefield. You aren't just operating in a state of calm logic, you are constantly at war with yourself, deeply influenced by the echoes of your past and driven by these powerful biological urges that operate entirely beneath the surface of your awareness. Moving on to section 2, id, ego, and superego. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the intense internal conflict it outlines. Imagine a fiery, impulsive monster colliding head-on with a rigid, immovable pillar of morality. That is the everyday battlefield inside your head. On one side, we have the id, representing our raw, instinctual drives. It wants what it wants, right now, based purely on biology and urge. Think of the id as that internal voice screaming, "Eat that entire chocolate cake right now." On the exact opposite side, we have the superego, representing our strict moral standards and the societal rules we've internalized. The superego immediately steps in and scolds, "Hey, sugar is a sin, you lack discipline, and you should feel intensely guilty for even looking at that cake." So you have pure impulsive instinct colliding directly with absolute uncompromising morality. So with these 2 incredibly intense forces constantly fighting, who keeps the peace? Well, that's the ego. The ego operates on what Freud called the reality principle. Continuing with our cake dilemma, the ego steps right into the boxing ring, blows the whistle, and says, "Okay, look, everybody calm down. We're going to eat exactly 1 slice of cake, but only after we finish our vegetables." The ego's entire exhausting job is to act as the referee, balancing the demanding instinctual drives of the id with the strict moralistic demands of the superego. And it has to do all of this in a way that actually keeps you functioning in the real world. But, refereeing that internal fight all day, every day, that is incredibly stressful. Because this conflict causes so much anxiety, the mind has to find a way to cope, right? So it creates key concepts known as defense mechanisms. These are essentially psychological shields the ego deploys to protect itself from overwhelming tension. Have you ever had just a terrible day at work, maybe been yelled at by your boss, and then you come home and immediately snap at your roommate for literally no reason? Yeah. That's called displacement. Or maybe you've just outright refused to believe a painful, totally obvious truth. That's denial. These are real-world examples of your ego throwing up a shield so it doesn't crack under the pressure. Now for section 3, Freud's psychosexual stages. Let's move to and see how this builds across childhood. Freud argued that our early development happens in 5 distinct steps: the oral stage, the anal stage, the phallic stage, the latency stage, and finally, the genital stage. Now, the absolute crucial concept here isn't just the sequence itself, but the idea of getting stuck, or what Freud called fixation. He believed that if you experience trauma or get stuck at literally any one of these early stages, it permanently impacts your adult behavior. For example, Freud argued that if an infant had unresolved issues in the oral stage, say they were weaned off a bottle too early, they might become an adult who compulsively bites their nails, constantly chews on pens, or even stress eats to satisfy that lingering unconscious drive. Or, if a toddler struggled excessively with the strict demands of potty training during the anal stage, they might become an adult who is obsessively neat, rigid, and highly controlling. Which, incredibly, is exactly where we get the popular term anal retentive today. It all goes back to this.
So according to classical psychoanalysis, personality is formed and you are essentially a finished product by the time you hit puberty. It's kind of a fatalistic view, implying that your adult personality is basically locked in by these early childhood stages and that lifelong conflict of internal drives. By the time you reach adulthood, the foundation is already poured and set. What this means is that under classical Freudian theory, going to therapy as an adult is basically embarking on a massive psychological archaeological dig into your deep childhood, hoping to unearth exactly where the foundation first cracked. All right, section 4, the Neo-Freudian Theorists. But what if Freud was looking at the wrong map the whole time? While classical psychoanalysis essentially traps us inside our own isolated heads, focusing entirely on internal drives, biology, and hidden instincts, a new wave of scholars blasted the doors wide open. These were the Neo-Freudians. They took Freud's foundational ideas and dramatically shifted the lens outward. They argued that we are profoundly shaped not just by our internal drives, but by powerful social and cultural factors in the world around us. It was a massive pivot. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how each of these scholars branched out. Think of the Neo-Freudians as this brilliant cast of characters who took psychology out of the laboratory and placed it right into the middle of human society. First up, we have Carl Jung. His key focus was the unconscious, but he expanded it into the collective unconscious. Jung gave us the core concept of archetypes, which perfectly explains why almost every distinct culture on Earth, totally independent of one another, deeply loves a classic hero and inherently fears a shadowy villain. We all share this universal psychological blueprint. Next, we have Alfred Adler. His focus was on personal drive, giving us the core concept of the inferiority complex and our striving for superiority. This perfectly explains everyday human behavior, like why someone who feels deeply insecure might suddenly overcompensate by buying a massive, flashy sports car to project superiority to the rest of the world. And finally, Karen Horney. Her key focus was social and cultural influences. She showed us that we aren't just biological machines, we're social creatures. Her core concepts highlighted how societal pressures, cultural expectations, and basic anxiety literally rewire our minds, fundamentally shaping our neuroses and our overall personalities. So, after exploring this incredible evolution of thought, from Freud's internal biological battlegrounds all the way to the Neo-Freudians' fascinating societal influences, I want to leave you with one final thought. Ask yourself, are you driven by hidden instincts operating completely in the dark? Or are you primarily shaped by the complex social and cultural world swirling around you? Perhaps the true architecture of who you are is a powerful, undeniable combination of both. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer today. Keep questioning, keep exploring the hidden depths of your own mind, and I'll catch you next time.